In 2002, the United States government told the American people that invading Iraq would cost $50 billion. dollars. A Harvard economist named Linda Bilmes said, "No, it will cost $3 trillion." The government called her alarmist, irresponsible. Wrong. She was right. Completely, catastrophically right. The final bill for Iraq and Afghanistan now exceeds $3 trillion, dollars, and it is still growing. Veterans are still being treated. Interest on the war debt is still compounding. The meter has never stopped. Now, 20 years later, Linda Bilmes is looking at America's Iran conflict. The Pentagon says $25 billion. dollars. She says $1 trillion. One of these numbers is a lie, and the people who will pay the difference, the ones who will still be paying it in 2045, are watching this video right now. Let's start with who Linda Bilmes actually is, because this isn't opinion, this is methodology. Bilmes is a professor at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. She co-authored The $3 Trillion War with Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz. Before Harvard, she served as chief financial officer of the U.S. Department of Commerce. This is someone who has seen government accounting from the inside. Their Iraq prediction wasn't a guess. It was a framework, a systematic accounting of every cost category that governments routinely hide, defer, and disguise, not necessarily out of malice, but because the incentive structure rewards optimistic projections and punishes honest ones. Here's what the Pentagon counted in Iraq: bombs, bullets, fuel, soldier salaries, the direct operational cost, clean, containable, presentable to Congress. Here's what Bilmes and Stiglitz counted: veterans' lifetime health care, mental health treatment, disability payments that last 40 years, interest on the debt used to fund the war, the economic drag of oil price spikes on every American business, the lost productivity of 300,000 soldiers who came home with traumatic brain injuries or post-traumatic stress disorder. Those costs don't show up in year 1. They show up in year 5, year 15, year 30. By which point, the people who made the decision are long gone, and the public has forgotten what they were promised. By 2023, the United States had already paid over $1.1 trillion in veterans' benefits and care from Iraq and Afghanistan alone. That number is still climbing. It will climb for another 40 years, as the youngest veterans age into their most expensive medical years. None of that, not $1 of it, appeared in the original $50 billion estimate. So why does this keep happening? Is it incompetence, wishful thinking, or something more calculated? The uncomfortable answer is all three operating simultaneously. Military planners genuinely underestimate operational complexity. Wars rarely go as planned. Political leaders need public consent, and honest numbers make consent harder to secure. And the accounting architecture is structured by institutional design so that the full bill arrives long after the vote has been taken. You vote for a war that costs $50 billion. You wake up 20 years later still paying the $3 trillion bill. And no one, not one politician, not one general, is ever held accountable for the gap between the promise and the price. Now let's talk about where this particular conflict is being fought, because geography changes everything about the cost calculation. This is the Strait of Hormuz, 54 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, a thin corridor of deep blue water connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea, and from there to the rest of the world. Through this 54-kilometer gap, every single day passes approximately 20% of the world's entire oil supply. Every barrel heading to China, to Japan, to South Korea, to India, to Europe. It goes through here. There is no alternative route that is remotely comparable in scale or cost. Iran knows this. It has always known this. Iranian military doctrine has explicitly stated for decades that closure of the strait is their ultimate deterrent, the card they hold that no other country in the region can match. And Iran has already demonstrated it is willing to play that card. In 2019, Iran attacked Saudi oil facilities at Abqaiq, briefly taking 5% of global oil supply offline. The price of crude spiked 15% in a single day. That was a warning shot, a demonstration, not a full commitment. The Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping that began in late 2023 attacks Iran's supplies, funds, and enables, rerouted over $100 billion worth of annual trade away from the Suez Canal. Container ships began taking the long route around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 10 to 14 days and thousands of dollars per voyage. This is not hypothetical disruption. This is disruption that is already happening, already costing, already embedded in the prices you are paying today. The war's economic footprint is already larger than the official budget suggests, and the direct conflict has barely begun. Now here's where it becomes personal. If the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted, not closed, just disrupted, for 30 days, energy economists estimate the price of oil rises between $30 and $60 per barrel. Immediately, not gradually, immediately. What does that translate to in the real world? Fuel costs up 40%, shipping costs up 30%. Everything that arrives on a container ship becomes more expensive within weeks. Electronics, food, medicine, clothing, construction materials. If you're running a business in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, you import the vast majority of your oil and gas through the strait. You have no alternative. You have no hedge. You just pay whatever the market demands. So let's build a real number. The way Bilmes builds it, category by category, so you can see exactly where the gap between 25 billion and 1 trillion actually comes from. Start with the direct military cost. The Pentagon's 25 billion. That's real. That's the visible tip of the iceberg. Add the regional military infrastructure, what it costs to maintain 2 carrier strike groups in the Persian Gulf, to keep 12,000 personnel in Qatar and Bahrain in the UAE, to sustain the intelligence and surveillance operations running around the clock. Conservative estimate, 30 billion. None of that is in the headline number. Add supply chain disruption, the economic cost absorbed by American companies and by the U.S. economy broadly when oil prices spike and global shipping slows. In the Iraq conflict, this drag ran into hundreds of billions of dollars over a decade. In a conflict centered on the world's most critical oil choke point, the exposure is significantly larger. Now add veterans' care, the category that never stops growing. The average veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan will receive government care for more than 40 years after deployment. Physical rehabilitation, mental health services, traumatic brain injury treatment, disability compensation, housing and employment assistance. These are not small numbers. The Department of Veterans Affairs now has a larger annual budget than the State Department, the Department of Energy, and NASA combined. In this conflict, we're looking at a force using more advanced and more physiologically damaging weapon systems in a higher intensity operational environment at younger average ages. The long-term care liability will be substantial, and it will appear in the federal budget every single year for the next 4 decades. And finally, interest. The United States is financing this conflict entirely through deficit spending. At current interest rates, the compounding cost of war debt over 30 years can equal or exceed the original expenditure. The Iraq war debt is still on the national credit card. This conflict goes on the same card. Add it together, conservatively, direct operations, 25 billion, regional infrastructure, 30 billion, supply chain drag, 150 to 300 billion, veterans care over 40 years, 4 to 600 billion, debt interest over 30 years, 2 to 400 billion. The Pentagon is showing you 25 billion. The real number is somewhere between 800 billion and $1.3 trillion. That is not alarmism. That is arithmetic. Here is the question that no one in any government briefing room will answer. If the American public had been told in 2002 that the Iraq war would cost $3 trillion, not 50 billion, 3 trillion, would they have supported it? The polling evidence strongly suggests no, which means the underestimate was not simply an accounting error, it was the mechanism that made the war politically possible. The gap between the stated cost and the real cost is not a failure of the system. It is how the system is designed to function. This pattern is not uniquely American. Every empire that has gone to war has underestimated the cost. Not by 10%, not by 50%, but by multiples. The British Empire systematically underestimated the cost of the Boer War. The United States underestimated Vietnam, then Iraq, then Afghanistan. The historical record is unambiguous. Governments lie about war costs, not always consciously, not always with malicious intent, but the structural incentives of democratic politics, the need for public support, the short horizon of electoral cycles, the separation between those who authorize spending and those who eventually pay it, makes systematic underestimation not just common, it is nearly universal. And here we are again. So what do you actually do with this? Because information without application is just anxiety. First, watch oil. The price of Brent crude is the real-time market verdict on Hormuz risk. When it spikes more than 20% above its 30-day baseline within a single week, the market is pricing in a serious disruption scenario. That is your earliest warning signal, earlier than any news headline. Second, watch shipping rates. The Baltic Dry Index and container freight spot rates are your supply chain indicators. They move before consumer prices do, sometimes by 6 to 8 weeks. If you're in manufacturing, retail, or import-dependent business, these numbers matter more than the daily news. Third, and this is the signal most people miss entirely, watch the dollar. When war costs exceed official projections, the U.S. government has two options: print money or borrow it. Both are inflationary. Dollar weakness follows, and dollar weakness ripples through every economy that prices its exports in U.S. currency, which is most of them. Oil prices, then shipping rates, then currency, then consumer prices. In that sequence, with those lag times. If you understand the sequence, you can position ahead of it rather than react to it. The fundamental reason governments undercount war costs is structural. The people who authorize the spending and the people who ultimately pay the bill are different populations, separated by time, by geography, and by the complexity of the accounting. The decision makers face no personal financial consequence for optimistic projections. But you can decode the pattern. You can read the real indicators. You can make better decisions in your business, your investments, your planning, based on what is actually happening rather than the number placed on the podium. Empires do not fall because of what they spend on wars. They fall because of what they hide about what they spent, and because the hiding prevents them from ever accurately calculating whether the war was worth it. The trillion-dollar secret isn't that this war costs $1 trillion. The secret is that you were never supposed to do the math.
The world runs on secrets. We decode them. Decoding Business Geo. New episode every week. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a decode.